What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is the 2022 Subaru Forester Wilderness. So about the all-new Forester Wilderness trim. So, I mean, first off, in general, all 2022 Foresters have been refreshed. They get these new headlights, some other slight tweaks to them. But here for the Wilderness version, it gets even more exclusive styling, has a bunch of changes to make it a little more off-road ready, and really puts it towards the top of its class as far as off-road ready crossover SUVs goes here for the compact segment. It really is very impressive with what it can do. So first off, right up front there, you can see the more rugged plastic you have there for much more of the front end than a regular Forester. So that was done deliberately, not only to give it a rugged look, but also so that it's a little more durable whenever you're scraping it up against, brush and things like that out in the outdoors. And on top of that, you'll see you have some new little LED fog lights there in the lower part of the front bumper. That is exclusive to the Wilderness here, the way they're styled like that. You also have a unique grille, and also all this black plastic, by the way, has this very interesting texture to it, which actually helps with aerodynamic efficiency as well. So that's a really cool little touch. You also see you have this hood graphic, which they say actually does cut down on the glare whenever you're climbing hills and things like that. So nice that it has that, and another cool little touch. It also looks really nice here in this dark green color. And also, if you peek underneath that front bumper, you will see the skid plate that this has. So that gives you a little bit of extra armor there as you're venturing off-road. You also, in addition to that, have these Yokohama Geolandar all-terrain tires, which are a little more rugged than your standard crossover tires. Give you a little more capability without being full-blown like mud tires or anything like that. And so that also pairs up with this thing having a 1/2 inch lift over a regular Forester, which was already one of the best as far as ground clearance goes in its segment. So now you have 9.2 inches of ground clearance here in this thing. So really great. They also improved the approach and breakover, departure angles, all that as well. So it's going to give this thing some really nice improved off-road performance if you are someone who goes on a little bit of a more challenging beaten path. You have a little bit more capability here in this. And there's some other mechanical things I'll talk about as well as we continue on and drive this vehicle. But also coming down to the sides here, you see more of that extra black plastic cladding here. It's a lot more aggressive than on a standard Forester. You also have a very large Subaru Wilderness badge here, and you also have the nice Forester badge there in bronze on the lower part of the back door. You also see the roof rack here. So you have, first off, some bronze accents on it, which is really nice, but it's also been upgraded so it can handle more weight now. So it now handles up to 220 pounds while moving, which is think about 44 more than before. And you can now have up to 800 pounds on there whenever you're stopped. So you can actually put a rooftop tent on this thing if you want. And then going out to the back here, you will see that you have, again, a unique rear bumper there, more of that black plastic cladding, and it just looks really nice. You have the blacked out badges there on the tailgate as well. And so overall, from every angle, I think this thing certainly looks the part, gives it an extra dose of aggression, and also, has some great capability improvements to back that look up as well. All right, so let's start up and go for a drive. The Forester Wilderness has the same nice Subaru key as any other Subaru these days, and these newer Subaru keys are really nice. A little bit of metal on the sides, has a nice weight to it, not too big, just really like this key. But of course, it is keyless access, keyless entry, and push button start here in the Wilderness version of the Forester. So you just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. And one other thing I want to add about the startup here in the Forester is that Subaru, with these newer infotainment systems, they insist on playing music immediately the second you turn the car on, no matter what you did whenever you left the car. Even if you had the radio off, it still turns it back on every single time the second you hit the start button, unless you just have the volume turned down. So if you have it on, but you have everything turned down to 0, that's the only way to stop this thing from automatically playing music every time you sit down here. I wish there was a way to turn it off in the settings, but there isn't, unfortunately, so you're stuck with just it forcing you to listen to music, unless you want to always have that volume turned down and then just turn it up to turn it on. Also, if you're curious to hear about the interior in the Forester Wilderness, my wife and I just did a full in-depth interior review on this vehicle, so I'll link that above. You can go watch that if you want to hear all our thoughts on this interior. But overall, the Wilderness is based on a premium trim essentially, but does have some nice upgrades like the StarTex interior. For the upholstery here, you have some unique stitching and the accents and stuff. And overall, it's really nice, but definitely check out that video for all the details on this interior. All right, so setting off here in the Forester Wilderness. So the first thing you'll probably notice about any of these new Foresters is just the visibility. Hands down, the Forester of this generation has the best visibility out of anything in this segment. I mean, you feel like you're driving around in a bubble, and it's crazy. Just like these A-pillars, not only are they nice and thin, you have the mirrors off onto the doors, so very good visibility forward, but it's also so tall. Like, I feel like I could put my toddler on my shoulders here and she'd still have headroom to spare, because you just have acres of headroom above you, and you have a really tall windshield, and so it just really gives you extra excellent visibility. You also have great view out of the back, of course, in typical SUV fashion. But you know, just it gives you a very airy feeling here in this vehicle. I'm also feeling like I'm sitting a little bit lower than maybe some other SUVs as far as the seating position, but it's still, of course, nice and high. We're up, you know, 9.2 inches of ground clearance and everything. It's still a nice high SUV seating position, but you know, it just isn't quite as crazy high as some of the others might feel. This competes with, and but yet again, still tons of headroom and still a nice driving position. But other things here, so this vehicle has a CVT transmission, continuously variable transmission, and so that means there's no normal shifting. And if you're familiar with any other Subaru CVT of the past several years, you know, this is going to feel very much the same as all those. But the CVT does have new gearing now, so it's shorter gearing here for the Wilderness, and that's just to help you, you know, climb hills a little bit better, and whenever the thing's loaded up with gear, to have a little bit of extra pep. And what I've noticed is that it really does make this vehicle feel a lot quicker than the power numbers suggest. This doesn't have the turbo engine like the Outback Wilderness does, which is really a bummer. But the shorter gearing really makes up for a lot of that, and really just goes to show you the power of gearing and how there's so many vehicles these days that could feel so much faster if they had just better gearing. You know, so I think Subaru knew that people were going to sacrifice a little bit of fuel economy, you know, having the more rugged stuff here on the Wilderness version anyway. So, you know, they figured, I guess, not as bad to, you know, have the slightly less fuel economy friendly gearing here of the Wilderness. But it just gives you a great driving experience, because it means you have a good amount of power. And, you know, this CVT, you know, I've gotten used to it a little bit more over the years. I still don't love it. I still think other people do CVTs that feel more natural than Subarus. But I have to say that, you know, it's fine, you know, for the most part. I'll be driving this vehicle for a whole week here, and I'll talk more about, you know, what it's like to live with. But it's a very eager feeling. There's really no delay. It just springs right into action here. And I'm also not in the Sport Sharp mode. There is a mode that gives you quicker throttle response here on the steering wheel, the Sport Sharp mode. So we will go ahead and put it up into that Sport Sharp mode. And let's turn down onto this back road here and see how it does. Here we go. So it still kind of just sits close to redline. I mean, there's a little bit of an upshifting thing going on. You know, it's still not the most natural feeling, but it does a good job. Now, as far as the acceleration, it is nicely improved over a regular Forester. It's a half second faster thanks to that faster gearing, because again, otherwise engine is untouched. It's a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated boxer 4-cylinder engine. It does 182 horsepower, 176 pound-feet of torque, and 0 to 60 is 8 seconds though. So it's 8.5 seconds for a regular Forester. So you're down to 8. Still not a fast vehicle by any means. 8 seconds 0 to 60 is nothing to be proud of these days, but you know, it's enough. It gets you by just fine. You know, it probably would feel a little slow if you had this thing loaded up with a ton of people and a ton of gear. But whenever, you know, you're driving around by yourself or with one other person or something, you know, it feels fairly peppy, feels good enough, you know, for average driving. And no one's driving this like a sports car. But, you know, for a few $1,000s extra, if you are someone who would appreciate not only just the extra power of the turbo, but also the fact that the turbo motor will do better in higher elevations than the naturally aspirated engine, you know, I think personally, for my money, I'd spend the few thousand more for the Outback Wilderness just for that engine alone, because it really gives you a lot of extra punch, and that has shorter gearing as well. So that really feels a lot quicker than this does. So if you are comparing the two and deciding which one to get, the Outback Wilderness is definitely the hot rod of the two. And the throttle response is definitely nice and sharp here in the Sport Sharp mode appropriately. And one thing I actually do have to say is that although I love that turbo engine in the Outback Wilderness, in that vehicle, the CVT, the way it's set up with that turbo, it's kind of confusing, because you'll have a little bit of lag from the CVT and then a little bit of lag from the turbo, and it's a little bit of a mismatched sensation, and it's a little bit tricky to be smooth with your throttle inputs in those turbo Subarus. In the naturally aspirated ones, you don't have that problem. It's very consistent, very predictable, and feels just like you would expect it to. So I actually appreciate the throttle response and stuff better here and the non-turbo Subarus for what it's worth. But anyway, we're coming up some corners here that I always take, and let's see how it handles. So again, 9.2 inches of ground clearance, a little bit more off-road ready tires. So I'm not expecting anything amazing, but you know, again, we do have the boxer engine, which gives you a nice low center of gravity. And you know, Subarus typically always handle really well. And I have to say, this does handle itself pretty well. Nice and quick steering. It really wants to dart into corners. You know, it just feels eager and willing. A little bit of complaint from the tires there, but honestly, it handles itself really well. And you know, I was driving a little quicker back there than most people would in their normal commuting stuff. So it keeps up just fine as far as handling goes. You know, I mean, again, no one's going to be pushing these things on an autocross course or anything like that. But, you know, for a vehicle with 9.2 inches of ground clearance and tires that are a little less street friendly than a regular Forester, I have no complaints with the handling. I think it handles great. I do think that Outback Wilderness does handle itself a little bit better, but aside from that, you know, I'd say this handles really nicely, and I would say it probably is, you know, pretty neck and neck, maybe slightly better, a tiny bit flatter than a RAV4 TRD Off-Road, which I drove a little bit earlier this year. These also aren't too heavy either. They're under 3,700 pounds in the Wilderness trim here. So yeah, it also gives you a nice light feel. And I think that's what I'm appreciating about the handling as well, is it doesn't feel too, you know, heavy. It really just has this light and darty kind of feeling to the handling. It's kind of a little bit playful, honestly. It also helps, you know, of course, having the all-wheel drive. Now it is, of course, going to be a front-wheel drive biased kind of system, but you know, can do a 50-50 split, and also you do have this dual mode X mode. So the dual mode X mode is exclusive to the Wilderness version here. You have regular X mode in other Foresters, which will give you like a snow and dirt mode basically, but this has the dual mode, which gives you deep snow and mud mode, and that'll actually allow a little bit of extra wheel slip so that, you know, you can break out of some deeper stuff a little bit easier, so it doesn't just immediately kick on the nannies and, you know, shut down the power. So it is nice that you have that, and it's just great that, you know, it just gives you a little bit of extra flexibility. Also, some other off-roading touches. You have hill descent control here in the Wilderness version. So that's, you know, like downhill cruise control essentially for low speeds. You also do have a front view monitor here. So you can press that button and it'll, you know, put a little image up. Unfortunately, it's not in the bigger touchscreen, and it's in this little information screen instead. I wish it's, you know, just was a little bit larger here in the bigger screen. But anyway, it's still nice, gives you a little bit of an extra view of what's going on in front of you if you're navigating in tight areas, especially off-road, be very handy. But another thing here, so we're on this road that has a good amount of potholes and little bumps and divots in the road and stuff. And the ride's also nice and soft and smooth. Of course, you do have unique suspension set up here and tuning for the Wilderness version to go along with the higher ride height. And you know, I mean, you feel the bumps and stuff. It's not super luxurious or anything. And it's not super soft, but it is still fairly soft, and, you know, again, for this segment of vehicle, very appropriate. Feels right about how you'd probably expect it to feel. It's also not too noisy. This road is a little bit on the noisier side, but, you know, there's not really too much road noise. There's maybe a tiny bit more tire noise, but it's very, very minor and minute, if there is any. Honestly, it's very, I'd have to drive this in a regular Forester back-to-back to truly say on the same road, but you know, it's really good. I will add, though, that I think that the refinement in here is a little quieter than the RAV4. The RAV4 has a little bit more road noise and just doesn't have as much sound deadening, it seems, as this does. This certainly seems a little quieter. It's still not best in class. If you want to have something that's really nice and quiet, the Mazda CX-5 and CX-50 are hands down the best in the segment. But, you know, let's say this is mid-pack and, you know, totally acceptable once again for the segment. And now we're out on the highway here, and I have the adaptive cruise control system on, which you do get here as standard in the Wilderness. It also has the, you know, the active lane keeping assist and, you know, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, rear automatic emergency braking, as well as, you know, forward emergency braking. And so it's a mixed bag. I've just tested out this eyesight system and some of the newer Subarus over the past couple of years as well, and other, you know, the Crosstrek, the Outback. And so about this system, there's some good things about it and some things that are not so great. The things that are pretty good, it does pretty good steering. So I'm just kind of resting my hands on the wheel here, you know, but I'm basically letting it do the steering. Now, it is still a hands-on system. You still have to be paying attention, keep your hands on the wheel and everything. But they have one of the more confident feeling systems from a steering standpoint. I can trust the system to stay in the lines, at least in my experiences so far. And so it's not a system that makes me doubt its abilities. So I like that about it, because that's something, there's some other systems that aren't quite as good. Even the lane tracing that Toyota has isn't quite as good. Mazda's system isn't quite as good. So this is definitely one of the better ones out there in this segment, but it has a few quirks to it, and I wish that it was a little more customizable with how you can set it up. Because, for example, every single time, you know, I'm just cruising on the highway, every single time someone comes into my lane, even if they're not close to me, it will beep and be like, hey, look, there's a car in front of you. And it's like letting you know that the system knows, like now, that this person just came in front of me here. And I don't know why it needs to beep at me every single time someone goes in front of me. Like, I understand that, yes, I'm seeing that. You don't need to alert me to the fact that someone has, you know, changed lanes into my lane. But it's just a little bit overkill. The same thing goes for the warning. So you have lane keeping assist, and you have it so you can have it set up so it's either a beep or it does some kind of assistance for you if you'd like. But the thing is, if you don't want to have the lane keep assist on, there's like the active one with a little steering wheel button, and that, you know, it doesn't bother you if you don't have that on. But if you you don't have on the lane departure warning, then it constantly has this orange light that's illuminated in the tack there all the time. But you know, you do not have lane departure warning on, like you're really living on the edge here. And it's like, it's just lane departure warning. I'm still able to drive the vehicle. I don't know why it has to always have that, because I just feel like I'm driving around with a check engine light on or something, having, you know, this warning light on the dash just because I don't want the car to help me steer. And so the system's just a little too much, I think, in some ways. But anyway, that's all of my thoughts here so far on the Forester Wilderness. But thanks to Subaru, I will have this vehicle for an entire week. So I'm going to drive around all over the place, and I'll come back and give you guys my final real-world fuel economy, as well as my thoughts on the pricing, how it compares to its competition, and anything else that I also noticed during my week of driving here. Alright, so I've been driving the Forester Wilderness for a week now, and it's a really nice thing to run around in. You know, it's a very comfortable, easy to drive vehicle. The CVT, I really don't mind here, again, without the turbo. You know, it still is pretty direct and, you know, pretty responsive. This vehicle just feels very comfortable to just run around and do your errands in, you know, haul the family around. It just fits in and just kind of nicely fades into the background in a lot of ways, which is kind of a compliment when we're talking about stuff in this segment. And it's just a nice vehicle to live with. So I really have no complaints as far as, you know, the driving experience goes. I just had most of the safety stuff turned off, so that didn't annoy me. And, you know, I just drive it like any other vehicle, and, you know, don't have to worry about all that extra stuff. But if you did want to rely on that safety tech, just, again, be warned that safety tech can be kind of annoying. But the last two things I really mentioned here are my fuel economy and the pricing and how this compares to its competition. So first off, fuel economy. These are rated at 25 mpg in the city, 28 on the highway, and 26 combined. That is 3 less than regular Foresters. So that's the penalty you pay for the shorter gearing here, and you know, all the other little changes here to the Wilderness version. But primarily it's that gearing. And I mean, because of the gearing, you know, like I said earlier, this drives much better than regular Forester as far as the punchiness of this engine and that whole thing, you know, as far as how it feels. But unfortunately, I didn't get even close to those ratings. I'm not sure why. I've driven this vehicle only about 81 miles, so not a ton, and most of my driving was suburban back roads, kind of 35 mile per hour cruising. It was a lot of short trips, so I think a lot of that is, you know, the warming up period where you get worse fuel economy versus extended longer driving where you get, you know, a little bit more efficiency. But nevertheless, my average has been about 20 mpg. Now, I did sit in a parking lot and, you know, film the interior here with Beth, and so all that idling certainly didn't help. So even if we rounded up about 1 mpg to, you know, 21, I'm still 4 mpg less than the city rating. And typically, you know, even with my shorter trips and around town kind of driving, I still usually manage to get, you know, 1 to 2 mpg less than the city rating, but that's about it. You know, it still is fairly close to that city rating. Sometimes I even get higher than the city rating. So for this to be 4 under, I'm kind of surprised, honestly. I'm not sure what the deal is, but just be prepared, you know, that if you're going to get the Wilderness version, you're going to take a fuel economy penalty, and depending on how you drive, it could be a bigger penalty than you might be expecting. And then the last thing to mention is the pricing here and how it compares to the competitors. So this vehicle, as tested, is $36,595, and for that pricing, it's very competitive. It comes in underneath all of its competitors. I'd really say the main competitor is the RAV4 TRD Off-Road, which I did spend a week with earlier this spring, and that's a very nice vehicle as well, but that is also even a little bit more expensive than this is. And by the way, this one has the Harman Kardon and navigation package, which is about $1,800. If you don't need the upgraded stereo and the nav, you can get one of these under $35,000. And with the RAV4, the JBL stereo upgrade, and that is an extra cost option, but if you don't care about the stereo, you can get a very similarly equipped RAV4 TRD Off-Road for about $38,000, so about $1,500 more expensive than this. That Toyota also, for that extra $1,500, will give you a few other features. The infotainment system's a little bit better, as far as it'll actually have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto here for 2023, and also you get a slightly better fuel economy in the RAV4, even with that TRD Off-Road version, than what you get here in this. And you also get a little bit more horsepower too. That does about 15 or so more horsepower. You have a normal 8-speed automatic in that versus the CVT in this. You know, there's some nice, you know, improvements for that extra little bit of a price premium for the RAV4. So just keep that in mind with that. And the nice thing is the RAV4 also gives you the option to have some nicer features. So there's a few option packages you can add on to those, so that if you wanted to have, heated and cooled seats, and you wanted to have a heated steering wheel and the JBL stereo and a few other nice upgrades like that, you can get some of those, and that does balloon the price up to about $44,000 for all of those. But it's just nice that it offers that, because this doesn't offer that. And it is also worth noting that even in those RAV4s that don't have that upgraded package, you still get perforated leather seats, or soft tech seats is what Toyota calls them. It's a synthetic leather, versus this has a synthetic leather as well, but it's not perforated, so it doesn't breathe. And I was really getting hot driving around in these seats on hotter summer days here, and the perforation is really key, and it's nice that Toyota has that, and it's a real bummer that this doesn't. But anyway, so I would just say, it's really, that's the tightest competitor, is that RAV4 TRD Off-Road, and I can certainly see a case being made for spending the few extra bucks for that over this. But the fact is, this still does undercut, and if those perks of the RAV4 don't resonate with you, then this could really end up winning out as the best pick for you. But the other competitor I do have to mention very briefly is the Subaru Outback Wilderness. So it is about $5,000 more expensive than this vehicle, but that $5,000 buys you a lot. First off, it buys you more interior space. It buys you a bigger, much bigger screen that's a little more modern feeling. You have less physical controls, but it feels nicer and a little bit more expensive. The interior is a little bit nicer in the Outback. Plus, the Outback Wilderness gives you that 2.4 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, and so you have a lot more power in the Outback Wilderness, plus the nicer interior and the extra space. And sure, I mean, all those things are logical upgrades, for the next level up from Subaru, but it's just, worth noting it's only $5,000 more. I mean, that could still be a decent chunk of change, but, the prices the way they are these days, $5,000 isn't a huge leap. And I think, if it were my money and I could, afford, the jump up, I think the Outback Wilderness would probably be, a little bit more of an appealing pick, even though the CVT thing is still a little weird with that turbo engine. But if you don't need the extra power and this is enough space and stuff for you, again, this certainly does make sense. And, all the other stuff that this potentially competes with is more expensive. Bronco Sport Badlands is $44,000, comparably equipped. And, everything else that, this could kind of compete with is also more expensive as well. So I think that they really priced this very, very well, very, very competitively, so that, it really makes a strong case for itself. And, I think that it gives you, a lot of versatility. It's also worth noting that 9.2 inches of ground clearance really is the main headline in this that makes it, more compelling than the others, because the RAV4 has, I think, 8.6 inches of ground clearance, even for that TRD off-road version. And, I mean, all the other competitors basically have less ground clearance than this as well. So, I mean, it just combines, a lot of capability, a really nice low price point, while still giving you all the, features and equipment you really want and need for the most part. And I think they just really do the packaging very smartly here in the Forester Wilderness. But anyway, that's all of my thoughts here on the Wilderness version of the Forester. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below. Huge thanks to Subaru for providing me here with the Wilderness version to review for you guys today. And yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.